The following episode was recorded a year ago. I wish I could say that the concerns we brought up in the conversation have gone away. Unfortunately, they haven't. We now have a new president and presidential cabinet that reflects the diversity of America. However, many Americans still find themselves questioning if they will be safe as they navigate around cities and towns new to them, outdoor spaces, and professional places where they may be the only person of color or unique identity. Last year, I watched Lovecraft Country. If you haven't watched it, it's a show that you need to add to your list. One of the key experiences within the show was how the family explored roads, towns, and restaurants in order to detail what places were safe for Black people to make their way through. You may not think that we need this information now, but we do. With places such as South Lake, Texas, Minneapolis, Minnesota, of course, these are my opinions, and other towns that people of color quietly share their not so good experiences of behind closed doors, we need to share this information. I hate to tell you, but many of us weren't surprised at all when Minneapolis went up in flames last summer. We'd been quietly talking about it as a place to avoid for many years. Many listeners will also be surprised to find that there are still sundown towns in existence. And if you're unfamiliar with what a sundown town is, I encourage you to look it up. The digital green book that we discuss in this episode is still incredibly relevant and needed. My guests, Parker and Crystal, have raised almost $83,000 at this point towards this project. If it resonates with you, please do contribute to their GoFundMe fundraiser, not fund, fundraiser. That's what they're referring to it as. If you're interested in moving to Colorado, check out my epic guide to moving to Colorado or buy me a coffee. I support local Colorado coffee shops while working on my podcast episodes and blog posts. Help support the show and manage the expense with a small donation. Thank you so much. Welcome to Square State. I'm your host, Michelle Jackson. If California and Texas had a wild love affair and some shots, Colorado would be the result. Today, I'm super excited to have a conversation with two ladies who are working on a project that is super fascinating, I think very timely in the way that they're doing it now, and is based on something that people needed in the past. Yes, that's really vague, but we're going to get into it. And I think that it's so interesting that this project is coming out of Colorado. In fact, I'm always endlessly intrigued by all the random stuff that's happening here, given the population that we have in the state. You'll understand as we get further into the conversations. Today, I have two ladies who are putting together an incredible resource that I'm so excited to support and share. If you could please introduce yourselves, ladies, because there's two of you, I'm going to let you guys kind of take the lead on this.
My name is Crystal Egley. I am co-founder of Inclusive Journeys with Parker, and I live actually just about a little bit less than a mile away from Parker here, just above Denver. We're both from Thornton, so yeah, Parker.
Hi, I am Parker McMullen Bushman, also co-founder of Inclusive Journeys, and I also have another organization called Eco Inclusive, where I do justice, equity, and inclusion training and resources for organizations.
Okay, so wait a minute. How did you guys meet?
I love telling the story. This is Crystal. So we were actually at a conference and we didn't know each other. My partner was also there because we worked together for our day jobs, and he came running up to me in the hallway during a break and he said, Crystal, I was just in the most amazing breakout session about diversity, equity, and inclusivity. and you need to be best friends with the person who led it. Her name is Parker. She's amazing. You need to be best friends. And then he just like ran off. And
Okay.
I saw Parker coming down the hallway, and I was like, I mean, if you go to our website, you can see pictures of Parker, like in a very white male-dominated conference. Parker stood out.
Yes.
A fair bit. So I saw her come in, and I was like, "Hi, my husband said we should be best friends." And I told her about myself, and she was kind of quiet, handed me a card, and just said we should talk. And so I interpreted that as like maybe I came off too strong, like maybe my husband was, not on it. And it turns out later I found out once we started hanging out that what I had said had really deeply resonated with her, and she had so many shared experiences, feelings, and I was just on point with her life and she on mine. And so she was just like busy, but also like, yes. So now we're really great friends. And so, yeah.
I think it's weird that you also live close to each other too.
I think it's
we didn't even know that. Destined to be friends.
I think so. I think it's just weird how the universe works in that way. And I do find though that in Colorado, it's not like 6 degrees of separation. It's more like 2.
Everybody knows each other. So it's such a big area, but has a small town feel for real.
It really does. And I've actually met Parker a couple of times in passing, but I've met you in random places. So I met you, I feel like once in Denver at some event. And then I'm pretty sure I met you at Estes Park for the stress day. The
stress protest.
Yes.
By Girl Trek. Yeah,
yes.
That was a great weekend.
Yes. So we actually have another mutual friend who was there and was like, Michelle, we're getting these Colorado ladies to go. And I was like, okay, that, sounds good. And it was wonderful. But anyway, I digress. So the reason why I wanted to bring you ladies on is I wanted to have a conversation about this project that you're working on. I think it's so, like, the timing it gives me chills just thinking about the timing of this. And I wanted you to share why you decided to create a digital green book. What purpose is it serving? And just kind of what that conversation was like in bringing this project to life. So if you could share what I'm even talking about, what a digital book is, that would be great.
Well, I think talking about the Digital Green Book and our project, you have to start with the original Green Book, right? Which was the Negro Motorists Green Book, which provided a guide for Black folks nationwide to identify businesses that were safe for them. Black travelers, in an openly segregated South, could identify a lot of spaces, but when you went north and west, that information was a little bit more covert. And in order to avoid sundown towns or the heavy presence of the Ku Klux Klan, the Green Book kind of identified where those safe spaces were. And it was started in 1936 and continued into the late 60s, and Black people used it as that guide. And when it was first published, it was printed in it that they hoped that there would be a day that this guide was no longer needed. And with the civil rights movement and everything, that the laws that were changing in the 60s, they thought that was the time, right? Victor Green. And so they stopped printing the guide then. But as we see, we are in the middle of this robust conversation about race and interactions here in the United States. And about a little over or under a year ago, Crystal called me one night late and was like, I have an idea and I just want to run it past someone to see if it's really out there, or if it's something that has legs. And she told me her idea for this digital green book, And the scope at first, because we're both conservation background, was for outdoor spaces and conservation spaces and other spaces that might be tied to it as people traveled to those areas.
Mm-hmm.
And as we spoke about it more, we were like, this could be so much bigger. Like, we could bring in so many different industries and businesses because people need to be safe everywhere. And with the advent of the murder of George Floyd a few weeks ago and the protests that followed, we realized that this now was the time that something like this was really needed. When, as a person of color, if you walk into a business, it could end with you dying, right? And it's not even extreme to say that, because people get the police called on them all the time because people working within businesses haven't dealt with their unconscious bias. And so you see in the newspaper just in the last couple of weeks, a woman who got the police called on her while using the pool at the hotel she was staying with her kids, because the hotel people didn't believe that she was actually a guest at the hotel. So they called the police to remove her, right? We see articles like at the beginning of the year, a Black man went to the bank to cash a settlement check. They called the police because they thought it was a forgery check and a forged check. And ironically, the settlement check was for a workplace racial discrimination
I remember this. Yes.
And then he got the police called on him. And so, it is a dire situation. And this reimagining of the Green Book, I think, will help us to not only identify safe spaces, but will finally give businesses what I often hear them asking for, which is, what is the business case for inclusion? Why should we be worried about that? The data that will come out of this, I think, is going to be very, very powerful.
What kind of data are you looking for and looking at as you build out this resource? So for me, when I looked at this project, one of the things I thought about was just the opportunity to support businesses that are welcoming and what that would do for their bottom line, and just from a marketing standpoint, from a client satisfaction standpoint. So if you could talk about some of the data that you're looking to collect in order to say yes to a business being on your database, that would be great. And just any other insight that you'd like to share as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that we want to differentiate between physical things in place, not only just ADA compliance, accessibility compliance with ramps, and is a restaurant's bathroom only accessible by stairs or things like that, but also a more subjective approach. So if we're talking about communities with disabilities and individuals with disabilities, it's like, okay, so your elevator technically meets the requirements, but is it large enough to be comfortable with my whole party, so we don't have to separate and go in 3 different trips? So that's just an example from the disability community. But one of the other things is we started talking about this as kind of like Yelp for inclusivity. Mm-hmm. And so basically what Yelp does for customer service, we do for inclusivity and just, feelings of general safety in a space. Oftentimes, we're not going through my own life. I'm not directly experiencing violence to my body every single day and every single time I go into a store. It's the unknown that really freaks me out, like going into an unknown location and worrying and having that anxiety is really heavy on me all the time. It wasn't until we started talking about the details of this digital green book project that I really put into words why I don't really love vacations as much as everybody talks about. Like, I just have this like layer of anxiety. Even if I had a great vacation and nothing bad happened, I just feel this kind of like, okay, we're going into this place now. Okay, we're going into this place. It's just so much extra to think about. So we want to give people a place where subjectivity based on their identity is believed and documented, you know? So if we go into a restaurant and we write a review on Yelp that says the service was slow, people believe that even though it's incredibly subjective, right? There's nobody's like, well, what do you mean by slow? Like, slow is, you know, exactly how many minutes was it? They're just like, oh, maybe I'll move on to the next restaurant. But if I tell people that I felt like all of the staff was staring at me and it made me uncomfortable, and I'm pretty sure it was because of race, all of a sudden people are like, well, maybe it was what you were wearing. Maybe it was this.
Maybe it was your hair.
City and you're throwing off a city vibe.
Yeah.
So, but people don't come up with all those arguments just instinctively when you're talking about like the temperature of soup, you know, or how fast or slow service was. So we want a place where we can also quantify the experience, the lived experience of discomfort, and then show businesses who, honestly, a lot of them probably aren't even aware, right? If I go into a business and I see a Confederate flag on the wall, I just leave. I don't bring it up with the manager, you know, I just leave. And so it's conceivable that maybe they don't realize how much business they're losing because of that wall decor, whatever it may be. So we feel like if we can quantify that in a safe space and be like, look at how much more business you could be having if you just took down X, Y, or Z, or made sure to retrain your staff to have anti-bias training or countering your bias. Everybody has bias. Active countering to bias. You know, we can really start using the data to affect how people see their bottom lines. You know what I mean?
I have a question. One of the things you just mentioned was this sense of anxiety in new places. And I've never had that experience. I find it really interesting that you've had this experience. And I would like for both of you to kind of share where the anxiety is coming from so that people can walk in your shoes a bit, if you will. I don't know why I've never had this experience. It could be personality driven. It could be, you know, because I've definitely gone into stores and I've been followed because I'm Black and that kind of thing. Like, that's absolutely happened. But in general, for me, I'm never really worried about the spaces I go into. But I think part of that is because I've traveled quite a bit and I've lived overseas, and I consider myself to a certain degree third culture because I started school in Japan. I've always kind of had this weird freaking experience with just the world. So I think it's really important to talk about this experience of, I don't know what's going to happen when I walk into this place, you know? If you guys could share that would be awesome.
This is Crystal again. I have a lot to say on that subject. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that everybody's experience is completely different and totally valid, right? So I don't want to make people feel more oppressed than they do feel or anything like that. For me personally, I kind of just internalized that anxiety. And again, it wasn't until I started working on this project that I realized that this is shared with a lot of people, and the more intersectionality there is, the more it compounds. So being Black is one thing. I'm biracial, so I am half Black, half white, and it's kind of a different thing. People often stare at me because maybe they just can't place where I'm from. Spoiler alert, I'm from rural Vermont. You would not have guessed that. But so there's also that level. People stare at my husband because he's incredibly tall. And so there's one level. But if you add on to that another visible identity, so maybe somebody is Muslim and, you know, wears a hijab, a headscarf, or somebody has a disability, or somebody is transgender, and it's a whole nother level. So there are these different layers that compound that potential experience. For me personally, I kind of internalized like, okay, so it's normal. People are going to follow me around stores, keep my hands out, smile as soon as I get in, look at a security camera and enter and exit. I just start doing that stuff to kind of avoid, but it takes a lot of mental energy, honestly. It wasn't until I started hunting that, and I was driving around and walking around in really rural places with a firearm, that all of a sudden it kicked up to that next level for me. For most of my life, I just like kind of just dealt with it. And I was like, well, I guess this is it, you know, but now I'm like walking around with a gun. And, you know, if I'm driving and get pulled over and a police officer asks me, do you have a firearm in your car? I say, yes, it's my, everyone's always like, it's your right. And I'm like, sort of. sort of is. Yeah. And then, you know, looking at me wouldn't assume I'm a hunter, just because of how my appearance just generally is. It's not like the stereotype of hunters. So if I'm like, yeah, I'm going hunting, I don't feel like I'm going to be believed right off the bat.
Right.
So that puts me in another level of danger. So it was when I got to that next level of compounding experience that it really kicked into high gear for me, to some semblance of I need to act and do something.
You know, it's really interesting. My mom is Black, but she's racially ambiguous. So she's one of those people that you never know what she is in a space, right? Like, so as a child who's observed some of the issues that she's experienced because of this, it's a very interesting thing to see, because I'm clearly Black. Like, there's no guessing that I'm Black. However, being in the backwoods with a firearm, that's a whole different conversation.
Right.
And it's a whole different conversation. And one of the things with Square State that I'm really focused on is normalizing POC faces in outdoor spaces and Colorado spaces. It's a very interesting thing because people, there's their own bias about whether or not we would be outdoors enjoying life to begin with. And then there's the things that I naturally enjoy doing. I shouldn't have to explain it to you, but sometimes you have to, so that you can leave said space safely. And we just saw a situation last week where this young man was basically almost lynched because they crossed into, he and a friend were going to some nighttime observing of the stars, and they accidentally crossed into private property, and these people basically almost lynched him, and they caught it on video. And it's just so scary to think that one small step, it could end your life because people don't believe you should be where you are. Because
and I mean, yeah, that's why I have anxiety, you know, and Crystal talked a little bit earlier about planning trips. And, you know, when I get ready to plan a trip, I try and look for spaces that I feel like will be inclusive, and whether that's like reading the reviews on an Airbnb to see if other people of color have stayed there and have had good experiences, to, you know, just asking around with friends. Like, you know, it is important enough to me to just make sure that my trip is going to be okay, or
right,
that I feel like I want to look that up. Or if I'm just going through my daily life, you know, I want to make sure that I'm in spaces that are going to be inclusive for me. And that's not always identifiable, you know? And so with that, I've been in enough situations where I've had bad experiences that I think it's always in the back of my mind that I need to be extra careful.
You know, I should mention though, that even though I'm not necessarily anxious when I go to a place, I do 100% have a criteria of where I will go. And I do the same as you ladies, which is I check to see what the prior experience has been in a place. I'm not constantly doing it, but if you're local, you know the places to avoid, right? But if you're not local, how would you know? And so I think that's the other reason why I love this tool, because we live in a state where people, first of all, are surprised that we live here. It surprises people when I'm like, hey, when I'm out in the world, I'm traveling outside of the Rona, because right now, obviously, I'm not traveling. And people are like, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, I'm from Colorado. And they're like, what? Like they're crickets, because they're processing that I'm in this state that they can't imagine that I'm from. And then a week or two ago, I was on Twitter and I said something like, no, something came up where people were saying they wouldn't visit Colorado because there are no Black people here. And I was like, there are Black people here. The mayor of Denver is even Black. Like, what are you talking about? But part of the reason why they were saying that is they had no frame of reference of the state, of the city of Denver, of other cities in the state, of what their experience would be like when they were there or when they are here. And so even though I was like, I don't understand this, in retrospect, I do, because if I'm completely unfamiliar with the place, and especially if it's as white as this place is, I might have a certain level of suspicion, if you will, or just reticence about whether or not I would be welcomed here.
This is one of the reasons why I really look forward to working with tourism offices, because I think society is being tricked into thinking we're not in the outdoors. There's so many people who are outdoorsy that are BIPOC, and there's so many people who are outdoorsy who present openly in the LGBTQIA plus identities. We're just not being shown, So it's giving that false idea that we're not there, because when you go to tourism pages, all you see is a very specific type of person. Or when you open a catalog for sporting goods or for outdoor rec, or a magazine that's featuring extreme outdoor athletes who climb mountains, it's all showing a very specific type of person. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard to convince people, like, hey, there's a market for this, we are out here, just show us as we are. And it's just hard to make a business case for that. So that's kind of one of the things we want to do, is say, like, no, actually, hundreds of people of color went to this open space and actually wrote a review about it. Thousands of people went to this outdoor retailer store and wrote, like, these are just the ones that wrote reviews about it, And so to make that business case for inclusion seems to be the only thing that we can figure out right now that people will listen to in a larger economic sense, and where we can choose to spend our money, and trying to show the data behind, like, hey, we're out here, what I mean?
I actually really love that you guys are focused on a business data-driven analysis of what these consumers are doing, what these citizens are doing, because I 100% agree with you that in the US, money talks. And I think that until people see the money, like, show me the money, it's hard to get them to care unless they already cared to begin with. Yep. So you can't, it's really funny to me, because in the past couple of years, there were a lot of tax breaks and changes in tax law and that kind of thing. And I was like, nothing is going to change in those businesses, because businesses are created in the image of the people who created them. So an example of that would be that amazing guy who dropped his salary to $70,000, that tech guy who runs like a money processing platform of some sort. And so basically he's the CEO, he changed his wage to $70,000, and he said that everyone who worked for him would start at $70,000. And people thought he was crazy, right? But then the employees were so happy and love him that the earnings and staff satisfaction went through the roof. Recently, during COVID, I think he took away his own salaries so that he wouldn't have to lay people off. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is businesses are run in the vision of the person who created the business. And there are many people who could give a crap about what is important to us because it's not part of their bottom line. And until you say on the digital green book at this specific location, this type of customer spent $75 to $175 on average, it doesn't move the needle for them. They don't care. Other people will care, but other people just won't until they see the dollars. So I love that you're quantifying this. And I do hope that there's a way to share the on average dollar amount spent, because I think that is a key part of the data that people need to see.
We really want to also, so we want to collect demographic data from the people who are using the site.
Yes.
And we want businesses to be able to see on the back end when they are getting a review, you know, or maybe they have an inclusivity rating that isn't the best, that they can see to who, what communities are they affecting, so they can make that real change. So let's say I own a bar and I see that 50% of people that come to my bar are saying that it's not welcoming. And as a business owner, I can go on the back end and see, oh, the majority of people who say that it's not welcoming are women, and they are listing these things that we have hung on the wall and the way the bartenders talk to them, and
the bathroom isn't clean enough,
and you know, as the issues. So suddenly, you know, not only is there a way for people to be held accountable and for allies and other people in the community to put their money where their mouth is, right? But also a way for businesses to see on the back end who is being affected. And we also want to provide resources for those businesses to make change if they want to.
What has the response been to this project, both locally, because you're here in Colorado, but just also outside of the state too? It's a national project.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about that.
It's been incredible. You know, I just have been so amazed by the outpouring of support we've gotten so far, and have also been amazed just by, you know, I thought that we would have support from communities, marginalized communities, but the amount of support and feedback that we're getting from allies has been amazing, saying that I want this. I want to responsibly spend my dollars. I want to know that the stores that I visit are treating other people in my community the same way that they are treating me. We're also getting feedback from industries that we never even would have thought of. We've gotten like almost five people from the wedding industry have reached out to us and have said, this is amazing. This will be so helpful in being able to get venues and resources. I can't tell you how many times I have, you know, tried to book a venue or buy a cake to find out that they don't serve people in the LGBTQIA community, and that this would be an amazing resource. So I think people are seeing all around the different applications of this and how it can be a source for really driving change.
I love that you've got this expanded focus in terms of equity. Could you talk about why in this 2020 and beyond version of the Green Book that you decided to do that? I love that you're talking about the ADA compliance and things like that. So if you could share that piece of the conversation, that would be great.
Equity is really important because it can give two random people the same experience, the exact same experience, but they themselves may experience it completely differently. So it's important to be able to be aware that the same answer for me isn't, you know, the same answer for you, right? So maybe I am a little bit more cautious because of X, Y, and Z of my identities. We have almost same identities, but your personal life experience is completely different than mine. So maybe we don't see the exact same equal data in the same way. So that's one of the reasons why we really want to make sure to be well-rounded in how we present these. With Kate's example, it's not the same to go in a Black person who is cisgendered and marrying somebody else of the opposite gender identity as it is for a Black person to go in and marry somebody of the same gender identity. Equal experiences do not equal service, so that is just super important. And I mean, it's so nuanced that one of the reasons it's exactly the reason we want to make sure when we build and grow, we hire extremely diverse and nuanced staff, because I can't speak to the disabled community. My mom is a member and I know a lot about it. I have a lot of friends who are deaf. And so I know that experience is completely different, between the intersections of ability, right? So even there, but I cannot build a platform to rate the disability experience myself and have it be ultimately inclusive and welcoming to that community. I just don't know it, So that's one of the reasons why moving forward, when we hire folks, we want people who truly understand that experience. You can't teach that in a class. You can't teach what it's like to be a woman or femme presenting in a women's studies class. You can learn a lot about it, but it is not going to replace that experience, right? So there's so much nuance that it requires a lot of extra personalized experience to make sure that we can be as well-rounded as possible.
But you could have also just focused on just people of color and not included these other communities. And so I want to touch on that too.
I don't think that we actually could have, people talk about, are you diluting the message by including these other communities? People of color make up those other communities. Like there are Black people who are gay, there are Black people who have disabilities, and oftentimes the intersection of those identities make things compounded and worse for them. And so this is for all people of color. This is for all people with marginalized voices, because if we only focus on one thing, then we are not including and providing resources for everyone in our community.
I love how you're doing it. And I think that it's the type of tool that we have to have at this point in time.
Yeah.
It's like a real true reflection of where we are. And so for me, I asked that question because I know that there's someone thinking it.
Yeah.
For sure, someone why is it you're doing it this way? And for me, I'm like, it can't just be one way.
Yeah.
That was our first piece of hate mail that we have.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to hear about this.
Well, I ended up writing a blog post about it, which people can find on our website, inclusivejourneys.com.
Send me the link, so we'll share a link in the show notes. Okay.
For sure. Yeah. So at first we were really, really stung and hurt by it. We had expected hate mail down the line at some point. We talked about it even, but to get it 3 weeks after we started, either I guess we're doing something right. That was our ultimate conclusion.
Yeah.
But for me, I didn't know really how to process it, so I just started writing, and I ended up turning that into like a theme. So every time we get hate mail, please don't send it to prompt me, please. But we have enough. Please don't go out of your way for this. But I'm going to use our hate mail as a theme. I honestly think there's actually underlying real questions hid behind the vitriol and the capitalized curse words, which for this one, they railed at us for going outside of the Black community to the LGBTQIA plus community. And I was like, so there aren't any Black people in that community that could use it,
Right.
So we were really stung by that because, personally, I don't understand how trying to assist in the safety and well-being and wonderful experience of as many people as possible could ever be a bad thing. Like, I just don't get that.
Yeah.
So Parker and I frequently talk about this project from the Black experience because that's the historical context for the original Green Book, and it aligns with our identities, right? So that's what we can speak to, but it really is for not even just people of marginalized identities, but for allies who want to spend their dollars where people of marginalized identities feel comfortable, safe, welcome, and accommodated, you know? It really, really stung, but by the time I finished writing it, I felt great.
I could just see you angry typing, like,
oh, I was angry typing. I didn't even spell check it. Like, I just was like, Parker, can I put this up? She was like, oh, yes, absolutely. So, yeah, I just tried to process it in a way that would be ultimately productive and answer the actual underlying question, which, I mean, it's a little bit a legitimate question, like, why intersectionality? We get it asked politely all the time. But this person had been so conditioned to react in a forceful way. Maybe they've never been heard before, or I don't know what, but I was like trying to sit there and be like, okay, what is that actual question that they have? Can I answer it? And kind of dissolve that hate into nothing.
So you guys currently are raising money to pay for this. And I think that, one, I wanted to record this so that people knew that and they could support this platform. But if you could kind of talk about what it looks like from the back end, building out this platform and the cost, and just from an entrepreneurial perspective, that would be, I think, a really interesting insight into this project.
Well, we're developing something that's going to be huge, and we started our GoFundMe about a month ago now and have raised a little over $30,000. Which is amazing, right? But we're realizing it's going to take so much more. And our next fundraising goal is 100,000. In the meanwhile, we're doing all the things in the background to kind of bring this together. We are working with, we're pulling together a web development team, and we're being very intentional about that and looking for people who have lived experiences that will help them with this role. And so pulling from folks with marginalized identities, we are talking with accountants, talking with lawyers, we are talking with folks who are helping us get things trademarked. So we're doing all of that work in the background, as well as creating tools for us to get information from the public, because we want to create something that is really driven by the voices of those in our community. And so we are creating a login for the site that we have now at inclusivejourneys.com. And that login is going to allow people to already start inputting information about businesses that they're using, that they're comfortable with. We are also going to be launching a public survey so that people can help us define the categories for what makes a business inclusive, because Crystal and I, as Black women, can speak to our own experience, but we want people from all of the different communities, disability, LGBTQIA+, so on, to be able to speak to their own experiences and say what matters to them when they go into a space, to know that they are welcomed, that they feel included and safe, and that the space has the amenities that they need. And so we'll be launching that as well, and are excited to get that data to help us develop what this will be.
I feel like a project like this one would do well with some well-placed partners. And I feel like there's a number of local organizations with money
yes.
that should partner with you. Like, NIFI. There's just a number of equity firms or even just investment communities that are specific to these communities that you guys could connect with. And if I'm a listener listening to this episode and I'm like, this is something that I really want to be a part of, either as a person who's responding to the survey or as a person who's donating to the GoFundMe, like, where can we do this?
Yeah, so folks can go to our website at inclusivejourneys.com, and that's journeys with an S. And on our website, they'll find a link to our GoFundMe. They'll find information about the project, all of our press that we've gotten so far,
You've
and
gotten
just
a ton.
yeah, and also information about me and Crystal as people and about our logo, which we are super proud of, which is a quilt code from the Underground Railroad, and it has its whole story of its own. And so people can find all that information on our website, as well as how to contact us. And we love hearing from people, and would also love to hear if people do have those partnerships or investors or folks that they think would be interested in this. We are looking for that to help us get to our next level.
We're wrapping up the show, and I have a couple of quick and easy questions, I hope. I find it really interesting that there are a number of really cool projects coming out of Denver and Colorado by POC, such as Black in Denver, which is a beautiful collection of photos documenting the Black experience here, Black Girls Hike, that kind of thing. And they're getting a lot of press. Why do you think projects such as yours and these other projects are doing so well in a city with very little Black population, or people of color for that matter? What's the deal with this? What's going on?
I think the city itself actually isn't. It has a lot of diversity. The Black population in Denver is about 10.2%, which as a nation, we're at 12%. Yeah, 13%. So it's not that far from where we are nationally. And, places, Colorado as a whole, I know Black folks are at 3%, but in Denver, we actually have great concentration of not only Black community, the Latinx or Hispanic community is at 31.8%. And so I think that people are trying to find spaces. And I think that even though, we don't have as many people in Denver as there is nationally, I think there's still a powerful voice there. And people want to find a way for identifying other people, to be in community. So if you're not in the heart of the city where that 10% is, but are more in other areas, where maybe you don't see a lot of people like you, then this is an opportunity to have community and meet other folks that are like you. And I know if you have like a majority identity, I do a lot of workshops where I talk about that and population and being in community. And sometimes I hear from white folks that realize that they actually have never had the experience of being the only white person in the room, or
experience of otherness.
Yeah, an experience of otherness and an extended experience of otherness. We work in organizations where we might be the only person of color in the whole organization, and what a relief. And so if you don't have that experience constantly, it would be hard to imagine what a relief it would be to be able to be around people who look like you and who you can kind of let loose and take a breath, and you don't have to constantly police yourself or be under a gaze that doesn't quite understand you, be under a gaze that's like asking about your hair or your skin product, or like not understanding your clothes or your dress or your head wrap. And those questions happen every day, on and on, if you are the other. And so to be in a space where you don't have to explain yourself is powerful. And I think that's why those projects are kind of taking off, because people are like, oh, here is a space where I can be myself,
Mm.
and I think other people want to support that.
So there's a book I'm about halfway through called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And this is a common thought exercise where, you go into a cafeteria in a high school or something, and there's 100 students in there, and 7 of them are Black, and they're all sitting together, right? And so you say, why are all those Black kids sitting together? But no one ever asks, why are all the white kids sitting together? And there's exponentially more white kid tables than there are Black kid tables, right? I think here in Denver, people often ask or have that reaction to what Parker just said, which is, isn't this segregation? Aren't you segregating yourself out of a blended experience with the white community? And it's like, well, has anyone ever asked the white community that? Why is that space so white?
Right.
Where are all your Black people? So it's commonly put onto, the burden is put onto the communities that are marginalized. And it's like, oh, well, you have this group. Well, isn't that excluding like other people? But literally no one does that ever to the group that is in the majority. And so it's just about like a mind exercise of like flipping that script,
Mm. If someone said to you, hey, I'm looking to visit Denver or move to Denver, what would you say? A person of color, what would your advice be?
That's an interesting question. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. And so just like any other place, or hopefully other places in the United States, there, is opportunity for growth and for connection here. I think you have to be willing to find your people, and when I first came, I moved here 3.5 years ago. It took a while to find that, because it's not on, I came from a place where Black folks weren't just 10% of the population, they were overrepresented.
Wait, where are you from originally?
Well, I'm originally from the Bronx. Most recently I moved from Virginia, and the area where I lived was more like 20 to 30%, right? And so it was easy to find those spaces that were comfortable. It was easy to find my hair shop and where I could go and pick up shea butter. And, if you are coming to this space from somewhere else, you'll just have to dig a little to find that community, but it is here, and there are so many people who are welcoming, who aren't in maybe a marginalized group, but who are welcoming and make it a great space.
I'm always interested in what New Yorkers, regardless of race, have to say about Colorado, because either they love it or hate it. Like they're just in general with life. There's no in between, right?
Yeah.
And I will be doing 2 different episodes where it's New Yorkers who love Colorado and New Yorkers who hate it.
That's funny.
And I cannot wait to have those conversations. Anywho, what would you say is the worst thing about Colorado, and what's the best?
The worst thing is I can't afford to buy a house in the mountains.
Girl, you know what? You gotta. Here's the thing: you had to start looking at the land, because I've found some affordable parcels of land. So we'll have to have that conversation offline. So
that would be great.
I would like to say that the conversations around race, I think, are different here than I have experienced in other spaces. And I'm not sure if that is Colorado or if that's any space that maybe has the demographics that Colorado has. But I think that when I am doing workshops or when I am talking to people, some of this stuff is really new. They haven't been forced into this conversation until recently. And I am so surprised by how many people have not been forced into this conversation until recently in Colorado, versus when I lived in New York or in Virginia. I think people have been fighting the fight for a very long time and have had these conversations for a long time, and there are still so many issues to solve, but it is a conversation that was on a lot of people's radar versus it being very new to a lot of people that I talk.
What do you like about living here?
It's gorgeous. It's unbelievably
It's
gorgeous.
It's amazing.
Like that, nothing beats those mountains and that big open sky and just the places to enjoy nature and the outdoors. And it is uncomparable.
So I know you hunt, Crystal, but what are you guys doing outdoors? Like, do you do, like, what are you up to?
I love backpacking as well and fishing. I fly fish and spin cast fish. I also have a tenkara rod, which is really cool. But backpacking, hiking, being outside in general, sitting in a forest where I can't see anything but trees. That's how I grew up. My house was in the middle of the woods. You looked out any window and all you saw was trees. I love that. I also often tell people, a little bit TMI, but I feel much more comfortable going pee outside than inside. So I just love being outside. Like, I'm super outdoorsy, and people in Denver, actually some things that happened to me is I am a board member for Environmental Learning for Kids, which is a nonprofit that takes kids from the Montebello area and their families completely for free on like backpacking trips, extra STEM classes outside of school, a lot of camping, fishing trips, and everything is provided from the socks and the shoes to the food and the transportation. They'll pick them up at their apartments or houses. And people often mistake me for somebody who was only exposed to the outdoors from that group. And there's no issue with being a part of that group. Obviously, it's a great organization and really, really helpful to the communities in the Denver area. But I often get people saying to me, like, what was your experience when you first got into the outdoors with elk? And I'm like, nope, board member, grew up, I'm super outdoorsy. So people assume I'm not outdoorsy just because of, so that was a weird thing that started happening. But yeah, I just love being outside. I especially love water skiing and downhill skiing.
I'm a snowboarder, so I'm all about
I'm
snowboarding.
Sorry, my connection's breaking up. We gotta go. I think we're about out of time now. Yeah, Parker, we gotta get off this snowboarder.
Throw it down. And I just got back from a backpacking trip last weekend. It was glorious. And I actually just spoke with Patricia, who runs Black Packers. So I'm really excited to share that episode as well. And ladies, I am just so thankful. I would love to take more of your time, but I won't, because we got to make the dollars. But thank you so much for doing this. I love how thoughtful you are about this project and how you're bringing it to life. And definitely don't forget to monetize your website with ads and all that kind of thing. So that you're always making money with it. And I am so excited to to support it as you move forward, and to support it in any way that I can. And by the way, if you could again share your link to your organization, I will share that in the show notes as well. And also the name of that organization, Crystal, that you just mentioned that you are on the board for, I would love that as well. Yeah.
That organization, again, is Environmental Learning for Kids, and people can find that one online at elkkids.org.
And then how can we find you guys again?
inclusivejourneys.com, and that is inclusive journeys with an S.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, so much. Continued success, and I am so excited to see this come to life.